This is Mark Sundin from Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and I'm here again with Dave Loper from ClearCenter. And today's screencast, we're going to cover use cases for unified threat management. So this one is specifically going to help us understand where it's useful, what applications make a good mix, and then we're going to cover some of the advanced features available to seasoned admins. I think, Dave, as we were talking about this when we were setting up the screencast, this presents a good opportunity for partners, and also salespeople, because this is a market that is unfamiliar to them. It's not one which we have really competed in.
Well, exactly. So, the people that use HPE hardware and are deploying HPE solutions, they're already deploying solutions in this space, but they may not have considered HPE as a solution for being able to do this. With the acquisition of Aruba and other types of things that are more at the edge, and with HPE's push for an intelligent edge, it actually becomes more clear to see and understand that HPE can provide a lot of assistance for the IT solution that is at the edge. When talking about the edge of the network, or even at the edge of a type of a paradigm like IoT, then unified threat management takes on a bigger story. And the reason for that is because the emerging threats are not just in the old paradigm of, well, the internet is bad and open wild west, and my network is safe and always, the happy paradise that nothing bad happens in, right? Because I've got a firewall to distinguish between those two. Any more these days, we have to treat the edge as being multiple places within our own infrastructure and our own network. So sometimes you're seeing an emergence of, firewalling against your own users, or, egress type of traffic approach. And ClearOS is there to handle both, an ingress type of attack scenario and egress type scenarios where you have something that's being dropped on the inside of your network, through bring your own device type scenario, USB sticks that are infected, those types of things that show up on the inside of your network. The paradigm is now you need to be very suspicious about what's both inside and outside your network. And ClearOS provides these solutions, and they work really well, in fact, amazingly well on HPE gear, and there's a big reason for that. This is why it's such a green field for servers acting as network threat assessment and threat management appliances, because HPE gear comes with very powerful processors, memory, and other types of things that certain hungry applications need to be able to do the types of filtering, or even just the responsiveness. I mean, you may have a small application, but just having the responsiveness is huge. One example is that we've been testing some of the HPE gear. Even the low-end microserver is able to outperform on a bandwidth level, dollars for dollars against other very popular brands that may be designed to be a gateway or a router, type of a situation. Here you have a server that has maybe only 2 NICs to it, versus an appliance that may have an uplink to the internet and a bunch of other NICs. And even though that seems like a downside because there's not as much NICs, the server is actually a lot faster at doing the job because of the power and strength that the platform gives us. So the solutions that we have from ClearOS, they work well with other solutions in HPE as well, like solutions from Aruba and others. And one of the reasons why it works so well is that we work towards open standards, and HPE is really big about promoting open standards, and it is kind of pushing that direction more and more all the time, to adopting these open standards, to having support for open source software in devices that go out there, and even leveraging open source quite a bit on their own tools. And so ClearOS plays really well in this environment. There's a directory component to ClearOS as well that allows ClearOS to snap into other types of software and infrastructure designs, so that it's not just that one device out there that has its kind of unique security context, but rather it can be merged into the entire security context. So when we're talking about unified threat management, we have a bunch of different applications that kind of make up that mix. And so we're going to go and look in the marketplace here to see what kind of applications that we're talking about. So as I pull up the marketplace here, it's searching for all of the latest types of things. If there was something new added, it would add it to this list. I have a lot of stuff installed already, if you notice that. And if you look at this page here, there's just so much stuff I already have installed, because when you're talking about having a server that is there at the edge, it makes a lot of sense to have a lot of things going on at the same time, because you're funneling traffic through ClearOS at this point. You're using ClearOS for infrastructure, and you may need to be able to have a really robust mix of applications.
So some people may be concerned about the risk that provides by putting just one server there with all this stuff running on it. Would that create an opportunity for threats and hacks to exceed, versus having firewalls and all these other boxes set up front?
That is a valid concern, and what we do advise customers is, well, and in some cases they may not have a choice. Their IT spend just might not justify having 10 different devices handling 10 different things. So it really depends on what you're doing. And ClearOS as a modular platform, of course, you can say, look, I don't want this and this application running in this same box. I don't want to have it that way. And that's okay. You can use two different boxes to accomplish that. You can design it how you want. ClearOS is a modular platform, so any of these applications are going to be completely optional to use together. In this case, I'm kind of looking at it from a point of, well, what would a small office or small business use, for example? In this case, I might not have a choice but to put all of these on one box. So you can see here I've got a variety of different applications, from bandwidth management and QoS to firewall applications like one-to-one NAT. I have infrastructure applications such as the DHCP server and others that help us make up a really good network infrastructure.
So I'm noticing as I'm looking at all these applications that many, if not all of them, are free.
Yes, in the network and gateway space, a lot of applications are going to be either free or very, very inexpensive. Here's one that does have a cost, for example, but most of them are so integral to making a good design that the decision was made early on to make these things that are like completely indispensable accessible to people, so that we have the ability to do an infrastructure at super low cost. Right? So for this set of applications that we have, I want to cover through some of the categories that exist. So for example, in the marketplace, they're going to show up kind of all over the place, and they're going to have brief descriptions to tell you what they're going to do. By the way, when you're downloading these, it'll say like select for install if they're not installed. But here, since I've installed all these, it's just going to say configure. So we're talking about the network infrastructure layer, and from ClearOS perspective, that is where ClearOS is providing a benefit of a network type service for the client, an infrastructure type benefit. When you're talking about unified threat management, though, that goes hand in hand with gateway, and especially if you're using ClearOS as a gateway server. So you're going to pay attention to these two categories very closely, network and gateway, if you're using ClearOS for unified threat management.
Now, there's probably a concern that many people have. They're like, configure, oh my gosh, I got to go ahead and configure all of these. And then also, what are all these dependent on? I mean, how do I manage all this stuff? It may seem kind of overwhelming. How do they, is configuring that going to be complex? Is it going to be simple? Is it going to be more labor intensive?
Well, that's a very good question, and it really is application specific. For example, the bandwidth in QoS Manager is arguably more difficult to configure than the one-to-one NAT. Now, some people may have come from a background where when they set up a router or a firewall and they're doing one-to-one NAT, they may come from a background where they have to go through a bunch of steps, right? They have to provision an outside IP address that isn't the same one that their router uses. So they have to set up an alias address. They then have to create a port forwarding rule. And on top of that, they have to open the port in the firewall. But for example, this one-to-one NAT application is really more simple than that. It assumes that what you want to do is an end-to-end point one-to-one NAT rule. And so even though there are modules for opening up a port in the firewall, even though there are modules for creating an alias address, and even though there is an app for doing port forwarding, that's not the app. Those aren't the apps that you're going to use to do one-to-one NAT. We have a simple app that actually takes care of that for you and does all of those steps in one fell swoop. So here, for example, we give it a nickname. We can call it whatever we want. We give it a public IP address. So this would be an address that's available to you in a block of IPs that isn't being used by something else. And you can put in that address, and you put in 24.123.45.6, and then you just tell it what private IP that's going to go to. So say, for instance, that would be 192.168.14.15.1, 10. And then you can say all ports and protocols, and that's it. Now you got a full one-to-one NAT between the device on the outside and the device on the inside, right? It's that easy. It's going to take care of doing the mapping of it's going to take care of doing the aliasing for the address, the incoming ports. In this case, we're doing an entire range across several protocols, and we're doing, the port forward, and it's also taking care of both the source NAT and the DNAT. So that private address will actually look like it's coming from that public IP. And this is the extent of the advanced feature, right? You can set it up to be specific for a port or a port range. And then if you wanted to make another rule, you just make the other, for a different port or port range, you just make another rule with the same public IP, private IP designation. So you're not going through multiple steps in order to get to that end result. So all in all, using this approach as opposed to other approaches that may exist with firewalls that take a lot of have a high learning curve, you can get this configuration done in a matter of 15-20 seconds, as opposed to some that it may take 10 minutes or so to set up an entire port forwarding one-to-one NAT type scenario. So I'm going to go back to the marketplace here, and we're going to take a look at some of the other apps that are available in the network stack. Again, like I said, the bandwidth manager, more complex. DHCP server, very, very typical, very easy to use and set up. It's going to identify the network interfaces that you have and allow you to set a scope for each of those ranges. Now, is there more that you can do with DHCP than what we have here? Yeah, there absolutely is. DHCP is a very complex application that has a lot of different nuances to it, a lot of detail. Again, we're making assumptions that this is being used for business and that there are specific business cases that you're going to use here. Now, if I look at this bridge interface that has a DHCP scope on it, you can see that it's very simple to add what you're going to do. Now, there's a lot more to DHCP. And anybody who knows DHCP is going to look at this interface and say, oh, this is limiting me. I'm limited here because I need to set up a particular option so that I can do a certain edge case thing. Well, you absolutely can do that. And that's what ClearOS does, is we're abstracting out what is the kind of the business case, use case that's most commonly used. And we expose that in the web interface. And if you want to do more complex things, you can always drop to command line and add those interfaces, and and this will honor your configuration. You can turn off auto configuration on almost every app in the marketplace by by switching it off in the auto configuration tabs. Certain applications actually have that button inside of their application that says, hey, disable auto configuration. I'm an expert here. I have a lot of advanced options. I don't want somebody coming in here and minimizing my options by configuring something. So back in this in the marketplace, we can see that we have a lot of different apps that are in the network firewall type space. So in some cases, firewall is a broad category that provides the full firewall set. And this is one of those applications that's installed by default. Other firewall aspects like the egress firewall, the DMZ, the custom firewall, those are in a sense helper apps to that stack that provide functionality where you need it. But if you don't need, like if you only have one IP address on the internet because you're a small office and maybe you have one IP address or it's DHCP from your provider, you don't need the one-to-one NAT application. It does you no good. The same thing goes for the multi-WAN application. If you don't have more than one internet provider, you don't need it. So we're not going to confuse novice engineers and stuff by having a bunch of options that they feel like they have to configure. And we give great explanations on how these are used. And if you're confused about what it is beyond what the explanation says here, you can always pull up the Learn More for a particular application, and this will take you to a lot of information about this application, about what it does, when it was released, and you can even get further documentation on that application by clicking on the documentation tab, and that will take you to ClearCenter's site where you'll have more detailed instructions about how to use it, how to install it, and best practices for deploying it. So we have a set of applications that are really kind of essential, in my opinion, for the user of that's trying to do a unified threat management solution, right? Some of these things are not really useful for unified threat management. IBVPN gives you point of presence in another country, right? You don't need that. That's a utility type thing that maybe lets you play your Netflix movies while you're on vacation in Bahamas, right? Right, because now your life is so easy now with administering ClearOS that you can take your vacation finally. So, but there are some that are really, really essential. Everything in the firewall stack is really essential. One-to-one NAT is essential if you have a block of IP addresses and you need to forward stuff into your network for a specific reason. Bandwidth in QoS is a utility type of application. It becomes essential when you have to set up a gateway and then provide quality service for maybe VoIP phones, right? Because that's right. Because your manager wants to make sure he's got a good clean call while he's trying to close the sale, right? This is essential for your job in that type of a scenario. Why is my X application slow, or you can tailor it for the individuals on your network, or types of protocols or things like that as a priority. Custom firewall. This is essential if you have some complex rules, like you want to open up a specific port rather than broadly. You want to open it up for a specific range on the internet, or you want to provide specific exceptions. We've got some advanced routing rules that aren't covered by ClearOS's interface. The egress firewall is really important if you are trying to block stuff that's going out. This application though is kind of less important if you are using the gateway.management app, which takes care of a lot of the security on the egress. But you may have a specific thing that you want to block, and the specific port. It's less used than, for example, the multi-WAN. It's a huge app for us. Multi-WAN allows you to have multiple internet service providers, but again, it's not a unified threat management type of an application. Port forwarding. That's essential for taking the default address. So unlike the one-to-one NAT, port forwarding is for the address that ClearOS itself uses on the internet to forward some of its ports into internal resources. It's essential if you've got just one IP address on the internet, or if you have if you're trying to pile up some stuff that one-to-one NAT, you're out of one-to-one NAT addresses and you want to pile stuff up onto the existing port of the ClearOS server. Radius server, that can be very essential for unified threat management, especially if you are trying to implement policies where, for example, you're passing authentication to wireless devices into the directory. So some people will use this application to make it so that rather than a wireless SSID and a password that everybody knows to individual login accounts that connect to Active Directory or the existing the Open LDAP directory on ClearOS, so that everybody has their own Wi-Fi password. That's huge, because in an organization where you may have a high turnaround, you don't want to be changing that password for the SSID for the wireless every time you let somebody go, because that's the security risk that you face right now with doing it in a way where there's some sort of shared password. IPsec for business, that is a really essential if you're doing a lot of interaction with between a business to business type of a scenario. And you're trying to give secure access to another entity, or maybe it's your remote office, and maybe you're trying to connect to things that aren't ClearOS, right? Another type of a technology that's using the open standard of IPsec, but you don't have control over that device to dictate that it's got to switch out to ClearOS, or you don't want to because you have an invested cost. So that is a really great application for that. If you have ClearOS on multiple sites, there are cloud-based applications that also tie into this mix. Like the Dynamic VPN app is the fastest way to get a VPN up and running, hands down. 2 ClearOS servers, you put in the destination location and the shared secret key, and you're done. Now you have a self-healing tunnel that's up between two ClearOS boxes. When we look at the to finish out the kind of the suite for the unified threat management, we look at applications like the application filter and the protocol filter. Those go hand in hand. They're using the same technology. One is looking at applications, like it's looking at characteristics of applications. Meaning it doesn't care what port it's going out of. It's looking for certain heuristics. So it's going to stop things like BitTorrents or other types of things that may happen on different ports. It's going to stop things like Facebook using a certificate shutdown. So it's a kind of a unique approach. Rather than blocking Facebook with a DNS blocker, somebody may know the IP address and they're still putting in the IP address to get to Facebook, right? Instead of having that, what it does is it'll look at the certificate exchange, right? There's a secure thing, and without actually looking at the payload of it, it actually looks at the certificate exchange and says, oh, that's a Facebook certificate. I'm going to shut down that established connection between Facebook and my user on the inside, so they can't go to Facebook. Attack Detector, this is a new app in the marketplace. This is really essential. What it does is it scans your log files for failed attempts to log in, whether it's SSH or they're trying to get into your mail server. After a certain number of attempts, the Attack Detector will shut that traffic down by firewalling off that host that's trying to brute force into your network. So it's a really, really essential application in a unified threat management scenario. The content filter engine can actually be a essential thing for the unified threat management situation as well, because on the content filter we're able to layer things like anti-phishing and antivirus to actually scan the content of the payload that's coming in on the web traffic. And those layers work within the layers of the content filter. So if you're going for the anti-phishing and the anti-malware, for example, the content filter is a prerequisite for those types of applications, and you can see those here. Gateway management for business. This is a huge app in the marketplace for us. It's brand new. It does filtering that's on DNS, but does it kind of on steroids. And we have a whole video that talks about that in great detail. One of its primary features is don't talk to strangers, which means I can't. You can turn that on, and your computer can't talk to an IP address unless it has a valid and approved DNS request. And that's a huge feature because a lot of attacks are coming on the inside, and you get drops on the network where there's a multi-stage attack and it's trying to contact command and control. And those are oftentimes distributed through botnet type scenarios where lists of IPs that are out on the internet are providing a command and control infrastructure. This absolutely shuts that down so that that doesn't happen. It's DNS with the ability to make firewall changes. And there's two different applications for that. There's a Gateway Community app, which actually helps you do filtration, kind of similar to like a DNS filtration service. Although with the Community app, that filtration happens on network, so it's much faster than other approaches. The intrusion detection system and prevention system, those that are familiar with open source type solutions in this environment will understand what Snort is. This is basically our way of wrapping up Snort into two different categories. One that is the detection and the logging side of things, and one that is the prevention. So if a log is registered that an attack is happening in the intrusion, it will intrusion detection system. It will actually proactively firewall against that target. This app is there's another essential app that goes in this combination, and that is to get the updates. Because there are a bunch of rules that were put out originally with the Snort package that are very useful, but there's a small set of them, and it was years ago when that was put out. And so if you want anything that stops modern attacks, you're going to want to get the IDS signatures package that will update these and keep these up to date with emerging threats on a subscription basis. We have other antivirus tools that layer themselves on there. These are optional, right? The Gateway antivirus will use the open source CLAM antivirus patterns and signatures from ClearOS at times, but you can also, if you want to layer on a third party to also do the inspection of those packets to see if there is a virus signature, you can get those. Web access control gives us time of day enforcement. So, if you've got some employees that you want to shut out of the internet or provide access to the internet for specific times, maybe you want to create a policy where you allow them to go to Facebook after hours or something like that. You can actually create time-based rules. Web proxy auto discovery, if you end up using the proxy server in a mode that requires authentication, that requires that you actually specify a proxy on the individual computer. And the web proxy auto discovery will make it so that you can automatically discover where those proxy settings are. And you're familiar with this, right? Because when you're on campus or you're in a big network, you have to go to your browser and you have to input some proxy settings. But what this does is it makes it so that if your browser is in auto detect proxy, it will actually find it and do those settings. What's nice about that is then you can take that machine, if it's a laptop, when you take it off campus, you don't have to deprovision your proxy settings because it's still in auto discovery. So if there's not a proxy server there, it's not going to use it. And lastly, web proxy. These are alphabetical. So that one is a prerequisite for the content filter, also a prerequisite for the anti-phishing and anti-malware gateway application. That sets up a caching server so that when content is downloaded, it can be analyzed by the various filters before passed through to the client. So we've gone through a deep dive of the various different applications. Again, some are easy to configure and others are more difficult, but there's always a document for each app. So you can always go into a particular application. For example, if I go into the content filter, there's always a document icon up here. And that will take you to the website that will detail more information about how to set it up and what types of what's happening when I press this button. What kind of information do I need? And More and more we have videos that go through demonstrations of best practices and other things, as well as all the videos in this series that will help you with those applications. So lastly, there are some advanced features that you can do. We briefly mentioned the custom firewall application, and that is one that gives you kind of a granular control on a on the firewall stack. But we don't want users to have the impression that this is the only thing that we can do, is have custom rules that are available in the web interface. There's a full and rich command line interface that's powered by the same technology that comes down from CentOS, for example. And if there's a particular thing that you're wanting to do that's unified threat management, and you know how to do it on Linux in general or on CentOS, then you can really leverage that to work as well on ClearOS. That's way beyond the scope of this screencast, but just know that it's there and that you have the ability to add these features and functions in, whether it's advanced logging that you want to do, or certain types of traps that you want to collect on certain types of information that your box is doing. All that rich tools for Linux is available, and there's more and more apps coming all the time that actually present those types of features in the web interface.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great, Dave. It's really enlightening to see how things interact, especially to understand that, while we did cover the specific applications in the network, there are dependencies and interactions between the gateway section or applications.
Yes, and the web interface will take care of resolving those. For example, if you only chose the content filter in the marketplace, it'll install the web proxy server for you. So you don't have to get in there and then realize, oh wait, I haven't installed something. It's going to install that dependency, and oftentimes in an application, when there's something that you need to accomplish, for example, it will tell you about it. That's kind of the paradigm that we developed to. For example, the Domotics home automation application. The first time you go in there, you're going to see a lot of warnings if you haven't, for example, configured if you have the attack detector installed, for example. It's going to say, hey, if the attack detector is stopped, it's going to say, hey, if you want to protect this app, you need to go into the attack detector and that you have already installed and run it. Oh, and by the way, you haven't set the password here, and by the way, you need to do this and that. So there's a lot of intelligence built in to kind of let you know what the next step is in any particular application.
Thank you. That is essential. So today's screencast, we covered unified threat management, where it's useful, the applications, and the mix. We've also discussed some of the advanced features that come with that. So we'll be back with more in-depth screencasts on specific applications in the future. Thank you, Dave, and
Thanks,
tune
Mark.
back in.
Yeah, thanks.